Compensation Consortium, our March virtual event. The event is being recorded, so if that's not cool with you, feel free to jump off and check out the recording on the website after. We have a jam-packed hour today, so I am going to get through a quick welcome and introduction, get right into our conversation. Today is our first meeting of 2023. It also serves as our annual business update meeting. So we will hear from Liz Spada at the end of our conversation. She will present our financial results and our business overview for the year in arrears and the year going forward. I would be remiss to say that Mark Zipko, our president, the founder of the NECC, won't be able to join us today. Certainly breaks his heart. If you know Mark, he'd certainly be the one that would like to be having this chat right now. He is in transit, won't be joining us, but we'll certainly be checking out the recording. We will be joined by quite a few consortium members today. We put out a steerage survey at the end of 2022 to guide us for some topics of conversation in 2023. No surprise here, pay transparency kind of topped the chart, and not only pay transparency, but the spectrum of questions of what folks are considering and what folks are thinking about. So that will be the basis of our conversation today. We're joined by three amazing subject matter experts and professionals in the space. And it's also a really neat opportunity for us to, what I say, kill two birds with one stone. Our headliner conversationalist today is Justin Hampton, who is the founder and CEO of CompTool, by far the most suggested speaker for us to go out and get to chat with the group in 2023. And we're lucky that Justin will kind of give an overview of the pay transparency space as he sees it, and he works with just a ton of different folks in the area. And Justin will also be a part of our panel conversation around some specific topics relative to pay transparency. We're joined on that panel by Pamela LaValle, who's the executive director of Total Rewards at Atrius Health. Pamela is also a board member with the NECC. We're also joined by Christy Ritter, who's director of compensation at Thermo Fisher Scientific, and we'll hear from those folks a little bit later in a panel format. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the most suggested speaker by the NECC in 2023, Justin Hampton. Justin, thanks for joining us.
All right. No, thanks, Sean. It's really great to speak to everyone, and I'm really excited to speak with Christy and Pamela later as we kind of get into our chat. But as we kind of get started, first of all, thanks for having me again. And I've got a short presentation that I'll walk through that really is designed to more or less kind of queue up what the state of pay transparency is today. We're taking some facts that I've seen from different polls that we've run, some other interesting topics that I know, and we'll just go ahead and hop into that. We'll keep this, about 5 minutes long, and then we'll get into what I think will be really, really valuable, and that's the conversation with experts, Christy and Pamela and myself. So let me get my screen shared if I can figure that out. There we go. All right, I think we got that. Then let me start this thing up. I think that's this one. Nope. Let's see, where's that? There we go. That's probably the wrong screen, isn't it?
Yeah, we got your presenter mode here.
Let's see, can I? There we go. That's probably close enough. All right. So today, as everybody knows, we are talking about how companies are managing pay transparency. And again, I think we'll have a lot of great top content through the panel discussion with Pamela and Christy. But, I think as we kind of get things started, I think, as we all know, pay transparency has become more and more prevalent every year. First, it was Colorado, then it was California, then it was Washington, New York, and there are a number of other states that are now involved. But what does this mean to those organizations that are outside of those states? Because there are many of them. Well, first of all, it's important to realize that nearly 27% of job openings in the United States are in a state that has a pay transparency law. And that's nearly a third. And it also means that for many states, if the work can be done in the state, even if the employee is out of state, that job needs to be posted with a pay range. And this is a really important distinction because that means jobs that have a headquarters in Florida but could be done remotely. Those jobs themselves need to have the pay range. So this is a really wide sweeping change in order to stay compliant with the different laws. And we'll kind of walk through that and discuss how we're keeping track of those different laws from a practitioner's perspective. But I think it's important to realize just how big these small number of states have impacted the number of job openings in the US. Now, pay transparency is being adopted nationally, as I was mentioning, but I think if we think about how many jobs are covered by those states, it was about 27%. But if we think about what that means even more globally, according to a study done by Indeed now, in 2020, about 18.5% of jobs included the pay range in the job posting. That number is now 43.7% of jobs in the US are being posted with the pay range. So as we continue to add additional states to, or add to the number of states that have pay transparency requirements, those numbers will continue to increase. I expect we'll see more than 50% of jobs posted with the pay range in the coming months, or by the end of 2023. And again, if you are curious which of those states are applicable that do have some kind of pay transparency law. Now, the companies that require something, we'll kind of go over this a little bit more, but it's California, Washington, Colorado, obviously, New York City, which made headlines this year, now Ithaca, New York, and Jersey City. Those are all required to have the jobs posted in the job posting, or the pay ranges posted in the job posting. Now, other states require that the pay range be given to the applicant at some point during the interview process. That includes Connecticut, Nevada, Maryland, Rhode Island, Cincinnati, and Toledo. But I think one of the big questions that comes up a lot of times is, well, how much of the range are companies posting? And so I don't know if you follow me on LinkedIn, but if you don't, one of the things that I do is I post a lot of quick polls like this using LinkedIn. And I've got a pretty significant number of followers, almost exclusively compensation practitioners. So whenever I post a poll, it's not really going out to graphic designers or people that aren't in the compensation field. This poll I asked is, what should companies post? The entire range or just a subset? And about 2/3 of the respondents said it's just a subset of the range. And I always found this to be really interesting. If you think about what the pay range means, it's how much could somebody earn if they're a highly proficient top performer, and then what could they be paid if they are taking on a stretch role, if they're just developing in the role. And what we found is that the majority of companies are only posting a subset of the range for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is it helps to manage the candidate expectations. There was another study that was done by, I believe it was HR Drive, and it found that 68% of applicants would demand the highest level of pay for a range. And as we all know, that's not going to be, in compliance or aligned to our compensation philosophies. So a lot of companies, to manage that candidate expectation, are just posting a subset of their range or even just a single rate of pay. In fact, what we found from our Squirrel data is if we look at, several million, we've looked at, I think last time we looked, it was about 8 million job postings. On average, if you exclude those jobs that are only posting a single rate of pay, the average range spread by job is about 38%. Now, if you include those job postings that have the single rate of pay, that number shrinks down to about 28%. But it's important to remember that these numbers will change significantly based on the type of job that's being posted. Warehouse workers, for example, have a range spread of on average about 15%, whereas your software engineers have a range closer to 30% on average. So it's important to realize that those range spreads do vary dramatically as a percentage based on the type of job that's being posted. But one of the things that's important to keep in mind too is what you post matters. And it feels like there's no way to win, to be honest. This was an article that was written by Bloomberg that I was interviewed for. Not aware of what the title of the article was going to be. And really what their perception was that companies aren't posting a subset of the range to manage internal equity, to manage candidate expectations, to stay in line with their compensation philosophy. This article was written in such a way that it looks like companies are taking a very malevolent and kind of dishonest approach to only post subsets of the range so they don't have to pay more. Well, as compensation practitioners, we all know that that's not really the case. The practice that we follow is to align pay and position a range within our compensation philosophy. But as you see here, companies are deflating salaries to keep pay down, is kind of how that was perceived. On the flip side of that, if you look at companies like Netflix that have a very unique approach, we can find an accountant, this is no joke, an administrative assistant, but it has a pay range of $55,000 to $360,000. I had an opportunity to speak with some of the folks at Netflix, and it's actually the way they post ranges, when they explain it and kind of their compensation and hiring philosophies, it actually makes a lot more sense than it would just at the taking at face value. So you can't post a subset, you can't post wide ranges. You're going to get dinged one way or the other. But as long as you are creating comp pay ranges or posting those ranges that are aligned to your comp philosophy and are consistent and in compliance with the law, you should be in a good position. Now, some of the things that we have found with Squirrel is that with this data, you can really flip it on its head. So we have companies that use this kind of data to go out to the job posting boards and find out, are our salary ranges correct? Or are our salary surveys accurate? We're also finding that companies use data like Squirrel to find jobs that aren't yet in the salary surveys. So if you take a blockchain engineer, for example, fairly new job that I know Radford, for example, has. But if we look at the amount of data that we have compared to your other reputable surveys, the data that we have from these new jobs comes in much more quickly. And also with this pay transparency laws, aggregating that data also allows us to kind of track data on a more real-time basis. Here you can see, for example, 12-month change for material handlers, as well as the amount of jobs that we've collected over the last 12 months. So that's really kind of what we want to talk about today is how are companies posting ranges, what are they doing, and kind of share you quickly how companies are taking that pay transparency data and really turning it on its head to make it advantageous to them. So with that, I'll stop sharing and get started with the panel discussion.
Awesome. Justin, thank you very much. Thanks for joining the NECC today and kind of sharing your journey at a high level and kind of what you've seen. Excited to jump in now to more of a conversation around some of the questions that surfaced from the survey. And it's interesting. Hand up here. We, Christy, Pamela, Justin, and I, we met more than a few times to prepare for this conversation. I am not a comp expert. I'm much more of a benefits person. And even just in that process of going through what we're going to chat about today, Justin, Christy, and Pamela are very nice to me and saying, hey, we could schedule 30 of these over the next 10 weeks, and we might not be able to get to this full conversation and the full thoughts around how dynamic this is. So we really put some thought around some questions that we thought would be most impactful to the consortium, and also use the steerage survey to be sure that we guide the conversation. So I'll jump right into it. And we'll start with the questions, really, and just kind of going off of what you shared, Justin. Kind of a thought for the group is, what is pay transparency in the sense of the law versus, what is pay transparency in the sense of, for your own organization or company. And please, Christy or Pamela, feel free to jump in.
Sean, I don't mind taking that one. Would you mind flipping that slide up that I had sent you?
Sure.
And Justin did a great job of framing up a lot of the laws regarding pay transparency for job postings. But I like to think about pay transparency in 3 different buckets. We talked about, definitely job postings, but you also have disclosure of pay ranges, whether it's internal or external, the job postings, and then also governmental reporting requirements. So Justin did a really good job of framing up there was an interesting kind of twist this week. One of the other things we talked about between the four of us was, how are we getting our data? And, I'm really lucky I have a great partnership with my HR compliance team. So, if you have access to a great legal counsel in your company, they're a really good resource, but also there's, tons of articles. Many of the consulting firms are putting out information that you can get, for free. But ultimately, there's some really nuanced things about disclosing pay ranges. And Thermo Fisher is obviously a large global company. And, Pamela and I were talking about the differences of kind of what I'm dealing with and what she is dealing with, having, her company mostly centered within Massachusetts. But ultimately, this is great information for everyone, regardless of where your employees sit, because this is going to continue to spread across the United States and also the rest of the world as we move forward. So, just knowing the laws is really important, knowing what you need to do, and then knowing what reporting requirements, because right now I think it's California in the United States is really the only reporting we need to do, but Illinois is going to be instituting some reporting next year, and that you have to do every 2 years, and you have to get a certificate to even be able to do business in the state of Illinois. So there's a lot of important things. I thought the slide was great to show for everyone here for your information, to really know currently. Of course, everything's changing. I'm not a lawyer, but hopefully this is helpful for the everyone on the call to see.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. And it kind of delves into the question, and I'll go to Pamela here. What resources are you leveraging to keep up, with current laws? I know not everyone does have, in-house, counsel or someone that is well versed in this, based on size of organization. So just curious, Pamela, if you've seen different resources that could be helpful as far as keeping up with the ever-changing legislation.
Pamela, we can't hear you, or at least I can't. Maybe we let her figure that out, Sean, and we can.
Yeah, we'll move along. Trying to help her at the same time.
There's dishes, maybe.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
We got you, Pamela.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, actually, so you gave me a question. We kind of passed questions around. So there's one more question that I want to answer to a little later, but let's talk about this one. So resources. So one of the things we wanted to talk to is that's one of the values of NECC. It's an informal group of people. All of you have very different walks of life in the sense of the kind of organizations that you're supporting, the breadth of them. Many are international. They're both in healthcare or whatever. So we sort of recommend all of you to sort of keep in touch with your colleagues here, because, for instance, Christy has a whole bunch of knowledge because, in fact, she's in the midst of massive pay transparency work. On our organization, we started with pay equity, and that kind of moved a little bit in pay transparency because we're in Massachusetts. So that's the number one. I think the internal resources you might have, if you don't have an HR compliance, you probably have a legal department that you can sort of talk to. You also you have other. We're a member as NECC is an affiliate of World at Work. So World at Work is also a great place to connect with, and I think we have some things in the we have some information in the chat that also can point to other resources. So we as an NECC will actually be starting to put things up on our website that kind of leads people to information and to keep current on this topic. Sean, if I could, so in essence, anything else, Christy or Justin, would you like to add to that? Okay, so Sean, if I could answer the question of sort of what other aspects of compensation that you're seeing that are impacting pay transparency, because I want to sort of set sort of a higher look. One of the things as comp professionals, sometimes in our organizations, sometimes we fight laws. We kind of, when laws come up, they can become a problem for us. We kind of look for ways to solve them. But one of the other areas I think that is in our as we look at our profession is that we might want to think about how do we embrace them. because when you embrace them, you can actually look for ways to include them in your philosophy and what's happening for employees and what's going on in the marketplace. What I see is we are going to have a massive responsibility for education, and education in the sense of managers and employees, because as Justin pointed out earlier, there's a lot of information that's out there that people, like the article, that's not the intent, but that's what people hear and that's what people think. So as managers of compensation, I think that when we're putting things together, like education and teaching becomes the major component of what our work is. So when people see those kind of articles, they then know that those articles are not quite factual. And they say, my company, we don't do it that way, but they won't know as other companies not do the same thing. So I think that, and also we're probably going to need to pull managers more and more involved in our compensation work. You know, when we do market pricing, when we do all kinds of decisions we make, because they need to understand and become stakeholders with us. It's no longer is it just our kind of decision, we the professionals. We talked before, like, you know, how do you use salary ranges? Do you have tighter ones? Do you have more levels? We happen to have 2 unions. How does it impact with unions? And one of the things with unions is that you do put lots of information out there. They actually show a contract, but how you utilize that contract is going to be important to have employees know. And internal equity. We certainly embrace MIPA, and it's become a language that our employees talk about, managers talk about, employees talk about. So equity is something as a company that we deal with every single day. So those are some of the ways that as you're thinking about what does pay transparency mean to you, is kind of like broaden your horizon about it and think about it as being something that will be good for the organization. Also, you have more stakeholders and partners as we do our compensation work. So thank you, Sean.
Yeah, no, and thank you, Pamela. I appreciate you kind of pulling it back out for us and kind of, you know, painting that broader question, right? So I guess I'll turn it back to Justin and Christy. You know, what other aspects of compensation are you seeing being affected by this conversation, right? What have you seen, dug into or thought about differently based on kind of the conversation we're having today?
So, I think as comp has been in the limelight for a couple of years now, and I think that started with with the inflation happening, with the remote work happening, with geographic differentials happening over the last couple of years. It seems like we keep having more and more things added to our plates that we need to be responsible for. We're no longer responsible for creating career leveling and benchmarking. We are responsible for kind of the public face of how our company, values people. And I think that's one of the things that's really important, especially when you look back internally, and I think Pamela really kind of identified one of the biggest issues is education of employees and managers, and leaning on your managers to be able to have that communication with employees. Because now with pay transparency, we've never had more eyes on how much we're paying employees than we have now. Everyone now has access and visibility to that if they're in one of these states, or if they're in nearly a third of jobs that are posted, they have that visibility. And making sure that managers can speak towards that intelligently and accurately as it relates to the business is one of the most important things. So, I think the role of comp has moved from, incentive plan management and, developing structures to really, an educator to managers and other parts of the business in terms of how do we value people and how do we align that to our comp philosophy.
Thanks, Justin. And Christy, anything to add to that piece?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I'll add is, Justin talked a little bit about data and how do we look at data and some of the things that we're dealing with job postings. Thermo Fisher does currently have Squirrel, and we use it to look at and aggregate data. But, sites like Indeed, some of the problems we're running into is if you're not posting ranges, they're going to post one for you, and a lot of times they're wrong. So just little things like that as comp professionals, in fact, I got the question yesterday about the Indeed. I didn't know about it, so I looked into it. So it's really important to think about, as Pamela, I think she did a good job of kind of consolidating everything that is coming onto our plates, but just all little things that are coming at us, I think are things we need to think about for the future.
Thanks. And now we'll kind of make a little bit of a pivot here into some of the more practically rooted, questions that are top of mind. And I see some of my friends on the screens here kind of rubbing their hands together to get into this conversation. But and we'll start with job postings, right? And we'll kind of talk about it generally, but do you post the entire range? Do you do it just in pay transparency states that require range postings? And I guess we'll bounce around the panel here, and Christy and Pamela can share kind of your thoughts, relative to where you are, where you're at. Justin, would be great to hear from you, kind of across the board with folks that you work with. But who wants to kind of jump up and start with the conversation there?
I'll start. So, it's interesting. I've been with Thermo Fisher now for, I think, a solid 7 months. And I came from a company that was extremely pay transparent, Expedia Group. And not that Thermo Fisher is not pay transparent. There's a lot of great things that we share with managers, et cetera. But what we're finding, especially with job postings, is that because we are such a large company and our salary ranges are set in such a broad way, that we are trying to be thoughtful about what we post. And we're not posting the full range. And that is intentional for external candidates. What we're trying to do is be thoughtful about what is the true salary that we want to pay for this job. And so that's what we're really looking at. And it's hard on a training perspective. So the way that we're approaching it is we're really focusing on talent acquisition and HR first before we move to our management teams in terms of pay transparency education. So for Thermo Fisher, it's definitely a journey, and we're in the first phase. The other piece of the question was for job postings that, we are a Workday shop, and if we have a job posting in the state of California or the state of Colorado, which requires the range to be posted, and we have 8 other locations, the range will show up as the California range for all of the postings. So I don't know if other companies have that same issue. So we're trying to make sure that we're putting the right language. As we all know, the geographic differentials for the state of California obviously is different than South Carolina. I got that question the other day. Hey, why can't I be paid this much? And so the other thing that's happening is employees are going on and looking at job postings that are in this, states that require the range to be posted. And so we're trying to deal with that. So right now we're creating FAQs and guides for our HR teams to be able to, definitely respond. And then we're going to bring our managers along for the journey. So I think we're learning as we go with this, and it's there's just lots of things that come at us, and we try to be thoughtful, but I think there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn from other companies as well.
And I can take that. I can add to that. One of the things we've done internally is that we have a job. We call it a job code list of all the jobs we have in the company and the ranges, and that information is shared basically on a monthly basis with all of our HR consultants, all of our recruiters, as well as when managers are doing their salary plannings or things like that. That data is there, and our comp people share that data with managers. And so one thing we do ask is that if managers have a question, that they go to their HR consultant to receive that data, and also at that same time get a little bit of education about what the ranges are using for. And we've sort of structured some things such that we've set the range that we have, which is fairly broad, with years of experience, with at different points, like at a midpoint, how many years experience would you have? So we're trying to use those ranges in ways that can translate back to managers. And that will help us in the future with pay transparency as we sort of start to have to post things. We tend to be willing to share information up to the midpoint. But I think that one of the things I'm looking at in the future is, are our broad ranges the right answer for our future? It might be that we have much more targeted. So it's an open question. But I think first, starting with sharing information with your HR consultants and your line managers is really important. Now it may sound like we're really far along the way, but we're not. But at least people have information. So it's kind of like cases you kind of camouflage how far you've gone. We are not at the point where, it's the very beginning of the journey, but actually we tied it to the equity work through MIPA, and that's kind of helping to move us along a path to sharing more information. Justin, do you have anything you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, and I've worked with companies that have moved down that path towards pay transparency. And I think one of the biggest challenges is always this fear. And it's typically been a somewhat unfounded fear by management, executive leadership around this employee revolt of them finding out that they're paid low in their range or that they feel like they should be paid more. And really what I have seen personally, and it's a fairly small window of insight, but I have just found that to not be the case typically. I would say that generally speaking, us as comp HR managers, we all have access to those employees that we can see where they're positioned in the range. We can identify those employees that we may feel there is an issue that we do need to correct that. And we can take proactive steps to make those market adjustments and those pay adjustments to ensure that an employee is paid in a way that is aligned to the comp philosophy. And by doing that ahead of time, that really helps to kind of control and manage the employees' concerns whenever you do move into this more transparent opening. And of course, what you'll see is there's probably going to be some outliers. It probably will carry a cost to the organization to make those adjustments. But in many cases, those adjustments probably needed to have been made anyway. Because you have this asymmetry of information in non-transparent organizations, there's a smaller amount of trust from the organization. I think there's been some studies that have been done that said the more information you provide to employees, the greater the trust becomes within the HR function, the compensation function. People perceive their pay to be more fair than otherwise if it is a non-transparent organization. And I think too, one of the benefits of having a more transparent organization, and I'm speaking of, if you share an employee's pay ranges with them, what you actually can start to see is as more employees have more eyes on their pay and their direct reports pay, it can actually encourage and create the need for better comp decisions on the long term. If you have a person that you're paying and you think to yourself, that person's probably going to be mad if they found out what we could be paying them or, how low they are in the range, it might not make sense for them to be paid that much as it is. So if you're able to, take care of those, manage those hopefully small number of employees that are out of market, or make sure that your ranges are appropriately set, it can create a company with a greater level of trust in HR and compensation, but also set you up for better pay decisions kind of going forward.
Yeah, Justin, I like everything you said, and there's a couple comments that I really resonate with from Lanning about making sure that your HR consultants are, having conversations is exactly the approach we're taking and why we're focusing on HR first.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really great comment. And then also cost, as we are all, we keep saying, the recession word, and it's not quite happening, but I think we're all looking ahead and thinking about what's going to happen in the next year or two. So that is definitely a concern of ours at Thermo Fisher in terms of ensuring that we're being cost conscious. So, I'd like Justin and Pamela, what you said about, as we move forward, because, just frankly, we're not sharing widely the ranges like maybe Pamela is with managers. We absolutely share them with talent acquisition and HR, but it will be helpful as managers make comp decisions during the planning cycle, that they are aware of the ranges and they are aware of kind of where people stand across it and make really good, better decisions. But, I love Justin's comment about fear. There is a weird sense of fear. And I think that, from a generational perspective, it's definitely changing. And, I think we'll get to that trust level with the right education, though, as Lanning puts in the comments.
Right. I think that education is key. And I also think that truth is key. Because one of the nice thing about truth is that it's very similar to recognition. When you recognize someone, people think, oh, that person was wonderful, they deserve it. Or, oh my goodness, they didn't. So I tend to think of the light of day. My very, very first job, and I've been around, I'm a very mature member of the compensation team, actually posted, it was a flat rate for every job they had. And so I learned that was to not be afraid of it, to kind of have truth be the most important thing, because sometimes people believe other than what we really have. So I think that, I guess my answer to all of us in this call is that don't be afraid personally, and to look for ways to educate, look for ways to look at all the data that's here. And cost is a big concern of ours. But sometimes you can actually help managers and managers at least understand that, because as they know more information, one of the things that they do is we've had people come to us and say, we can't hire this person's too high. And that's important because then they understand and they own their own budgets, et cetera. So I think the whole salary ranges and posting that, maybe in fact in the future we'll all have a similar philosophy as companies. So as companies do that, then in fact the information will be more clear to people. If we all say we'll all post the midpoint, or we'll all post some particular range, because today, as you mentioned about Netflix, they have this big range that shows, and it basically says you can do anything you want. You can be a CEO. That's the message they're giving, but it's not really a total sense of truth. It's that's my perspective. So Sean, anything?
Yeah,
let's go. I think the question of how do you work around when someone sees the high end of the range, we're finding when it comes to hiring. I'll just finish this on. Every single person is negotiating. It doesn't matter who they are. They're adding $4,000 or $5,000 to what the request is. I don't know if you're finding that. So to some extent, it's not really having them whether they see the ranges or not, because that doesn't really matter to them. What matters is they all think that they need to negotiate. So my advice also is to not think of that as being a pay transparency issue. It's just the marketplace right now continually to negotiate. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, and thank you. I mean, we covered a lot there, and it kind of crosses over into my next question, and we've already touched on it a little bit, but relative to this concept of what we're willing to share, right? In current employees getting quote unquote hip to what's going on and looking around, generally speaking, what are we willing to share with employees if asked, whether they're in a transparency state or a non-transparency state? Like, how are we thinking about what we're willing to ask our own employees when they reach out and start asking questions about what we're doing and what's changed relative to the information that we're sharing?
So I can answer one quickly, is that we have 2 unions and their ranges are posted. So that's a total transparency. It's in the contract, and sometimes those contracts are viable. We do share the range, but we share it from the manager. So people who ask for it to HR, we make them go back to the manager and we'll share that range. And so they can have a discussion about their performance, their opportunities, et cetera. So Christy, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to get there, Pamela. Right now, we are currently only sharing ranges for requested pay transparency states. So currently in our company, it's the state of California. I believe that's the only state that I have to give internal. Now applicants is a different story, but we are giving, again, back to the education journey, we're giving, if we are getting those questions from other states currently, we're saying not to be dismissive. We think it's important to understand why that they're asking. And then we're being very selective about, how we answer those employees. And so right now it's a little tedious, but we're trying to gather the data of what type of questions people are asking. So I know this sounds crazy with the large company we are, but we actually have a tracking log that we're working with our field HR teams on. And if they get requests, I want to see what kind of requests there are so that we can build our training and education for the future around what people are asking for. So right now we are not currently sharing ranges within non-pay transparency states. But I think our ultimate goal is to get to exactly what Pamela said, is that we want to remove HR from the conversation eventually. And we want managers to be able to take that conversation over. But again, it goes back to ensuring that we are aligned as a company and our philosophy and aligned with the training to our managers.
Thanks, Christine. And I guess, Justin, in that sense, having worked kind of, across the landscape, and I hesitate to use the term best practice, but I guess, what have you seen that's different, from maybe client to client, or just from, philosophy around this?
Yeah, I mean, I think really in terms of when someone's posting a job description or they're educating around it, it really, I think that North Star needs to be your compensation philosophy. And I think if you can point back towards that, that's going to be one of the most important things. Everybody has a different philosophy and everybody pays differently. As I was speaking about Netflix earlier, I mean, they have a fairly new compensation team. That's a fairly new part of the business for that organization, believe it or not. And the approach they take to pay budget or how they pay people is very different than other organizations. And so even though as they're posting their ranges, it looks strange. Even when they're communicating it to employees, it's probably somewhat difficult when you have don't have a traditional range like most of us have. But I think a lot of it still comes back to making sure that you have top-down support of your compensation practices from your leadership team, and then that you're also kind of working with parts of the business to make sure that they understand what that means to them specifically.
So Justin, can I ask a follow-up question? Because I know that we've had a couple comments about this Netflix. To me, it seems almost like a cop-out, like, oh, I'm just going to post this big, giant, wide range. And I also don't feel like it's in the, because one of the other things that I'm running into is, how do you really interpret the law? Because there's no precedent, like there's nothing really. So to me, it doesn't seem like that is going to be something that's going to stand up in the future in terms of, because like posting a $0 to $1 million and then trying to explain it to an employee, like, oh, I'm posting $1 million because you could be CEO someday. Like, I'm just curious about, what your thoughts are on that.
I think what we will see happen over time is that feedback and that pushback that we're getting from just the public in general, it's not going to necessarily align to a company's kind of overarching mission statement or how they want to be perceived by the general public. Especially as you have more Gen Zs moving into the workforce, that's mission and values, shared mission and values is much more important to the younger generations that are becoming a part of the workforce. And I think if it's perceived as a cop-out, that's not going to support kind of your people and culture strategy. So I think what we will find is that there are companies that have, non-standard approaches for how they manage comp. They may use broadbands. They may not have people budgets. They may target the 90th percentile. They may use, step progression. And a lot of those aren't going to fit nicely in line with our expectations of, what a pay range really looks like. And I think that we'll find that, 99.9% of companies, are going to, maybe not that much, but a large percent of those companies are going to fall in line with kind of what people expect. But there are always going to be those outliers. And those outliers are going to be those companies that are, oftentimes highly successful because they have found a different approach to managing the business, managing compensation, managing, career growth and talent that doesn't fit within those expectations. I expect what we will see is there will be pushback, both publicly and legally, on some of those companies that really can't defend the way they're posting their ranges. But I think that as we kind of see the challenges kind of move out, I think we'll see things change a little bit. I think as soon as one of the cards falls, I think you might see a lot of other companies proactively change their approaches to make sure they're not seeing those significant fines that California and New York State both have.
So one of the thoughts I had is, will companies in the future, and just I'm asking this view as well, is today we have, let's say, 4 levels of a job. One of my hypotheses is that we're going to have more levels. And so what happens is ranges don't necessarily mean as much because people really want to continually grow. And so it's really about the growth. And then we kind of say it's about ranges, but it's not. It's I want to continue to grow both professionally in my career. I want to be a 1 or 2 or 5 or 10. And I want to be paid for it. Where I am in the range is kind of a proxy for that need. So what are you seeing in that space?
Is that for me? Sorry.
Can you hear me? I don't know if you were able to hear me.
No,
okay.
No. And I think it's interesting. And I think what we'll continue to find is that, as different ways of paying people changes, the landscape changes. 2 years ago, the big question was, how do we manage people working remotely? We're a Kansas company now. They're moving to New York. Are we supposed to pay for their new cost of living? And now we're seeing a greater resurgence of skill-based pay, and a lot of these things aren't going to, fall in line with kind of the legal requirements. I think companies, especially some companies, are able to move and change their pay practices and pay strategies much more quickly than laws are going to, kind of support. And so I think what we will find is that we're still going to see your ranges that are being posted to remain compliant with the laws. But I think what we will probably see differences in is, how wide those ranges or how narrow those ranges are at the company level, because those companies are going to have the, different approaches to pay. For me, for example, one of the suggestions I have for companies that they were trying to figure out how to deal with, geographic pay is, have a base pay rate that's at the national level, and then have a geographic differential as a separate line item on a paycheck, the same way as you would treat a shift differential. Now, does that mean the pay actually changes, or the range that you would post changes, or do you still list the national rate and then kind of suggest that there are different additional perks to reflect, skills, responsibilities, location? I think all of that is still kind of yet to be decided. And I think we're still going to see the majority of companies, fitting in that box of expectations, but there's still going to be those outliers that are going to change, and we'll see challenges come out publicly and legally.
And that's one of the reasons I think the compensation profession is going to be a fun place to be, everybody. It's going to be fun. There's so much change. We have such an opportunity to influence the organization. Just think, pay transparency is going to be a really important point for every single person in this call to think about. I just realized, Sean, there's a message from Rachel.
Yep.
Can you talk to that?
Yeah, well, we have about 4 minutes left before we make a pivot here. So what I would ask is, perhaps if the panelists don't mind, answering Rachel's question in the chat box after we jump off here. I did want to touch on one piece before we pivot, and it's something that's come up, but we really haven't spent a ton of time. Would love to hear maybe a real quick high level thought process around this concept of education for our managers, and kind of how we're thinking about it, and how we're planning on getting there. And I know we have 3 minutes, but would love to just hear from you around at least how you're thinking about getting at this, which is seemingly a very important piece to the whole conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably not the least farthest along in this journey compared to Pamela, but ultimately I think from a phasing perspective, the first thing that my team is working on is alignment with executives first. Kind of back to Justin and Pamela's comments about fear, we want to approach this in a fearless perspective, but alignment with our executives. So that's the first thing we're doing before we go out and start training our managers, is to ensure that we have really top-down alignment. And then we have currently a lot of really great training out there today. What we're finding is a lot of people are just like, I don't know comp, I don't know what to do. So we are going to be probably driving a campaign to reintroduce all of the great tools and things we have out there today, not only for our managers, but also HR. And then we're going to kind of take the next phase approach, as we know pay transparency will continue to permeate through the country and the world. And that is probably going to be more of a second half into a 2024 campaign for us. So tactically, that's how we're approaching it. And making sure that we're training on how do we, Pamela, she blew my mind yesterday when she talked about how they actually involve managers in their, in
Market pricing.
It was, so really interesting to maybe pick her brain at a later date. How do you do that? Why do you do that? What's kind of what are the pros and cons? So those are just things that we hadn't thought about before, but tactically ensuring that they understand our pay ranges. They understand how important pay equity is for the future. All of those things need to happen, and just dumping all of that on them at once is overwhelming. So we're trying to be thoughtful about our approach.
Yes, and I could say the market pricing and including them, the compensation team I have in Atrius is excellent, and managers own those ranges. So when you own a range, then you help to educate them how to use it. Then in fact they can communicate it because it's theirs. Now, am I there 100%? No way. But there are some good places, and they make the tough decisions. Then I really want compensation to be owned by managers, so they make the difficult decisions. We don't make it for them. So it's a real partnership.
Well, thank you so much, Justin, Pamela, Christy. I certainly don't have a crystal ball. I don't think this will be the last time we do something like this this year. I think there'll be a continuation. Shoot, there was a couple questions we didn't even get to, but really appreciate you jumping on and helping us keep this conversation going with the NECC.